Hello, and welcome to my presentation. My name is James Gootee. I am currently a fifth year assistant language teacher, or ALT, on the Japan Exchange Teaching Program, or the JET program. And my presentation topic today is titled Navigating the Pandemic in Public Schools. Um, so, this is an overview of what I'll be talking about today. First, I'll introduce the JET program. Many of you are probably already familiar with it. However, or maybe even you're a participant on it, or you've been a participant in the past. But it's still good to give an introduction for those who are either unfamiliar or it's been a long time. Because the program has changed a bit in recent years, and I'll get into that in the next slide. Um, but first, I'll introduce the JET program. After that, I'll talk about the effects that the COVID-19 pandemics had on the program, and particularly, the way it's affected, us teachers. This is teachers' journeys. This is teacher development. So the TD SIG. So I'll talk a lot about that. Not only my personal experience, but also the experience of my friends and colleagues and others that other JET participants that I've heard their teacher journeys and the way the COVID has impacted them. But to do that, I need to explain what ESID is. And ESID basically stands for every situation is different, and it's a very important thing to know whenever you talk about the JET program. So I'll talk about that later on in the presentation. And then after kind of introducing how it's affected me personally, I'll also talk about how it's affected me in the classroom. Um, and in particular, I'll talk about a public health lesson that I did to kind of adapt to the situation. Um, and last, I'll talk about the JET program moving forward. My thoughts on the direction the JET program can go um, after all of this, and just the kind of the questions we need to be thinking about as we move forward with the JET program in particular and English education in Japan in general. So first, the JET program. What is the JET program? Well, I mentioned before that it is the Japan Exchange Teaching Program, and this program, has been the start of my teaching journey. It's been the start of many people's teaching journeys, possibly yours. Others, it's the continuation of it. They hire three different types of people. Um, they hire assistant language teachers, ALTs like myself, coordinators for international relations, CIRs, and sports exchange advisors, SEAs. Now, I've never met an SEA in my life. That's a very rare position. Now, the CIRs, there's probably a handful in every prefecture, but it's not very common. The vast majority of participants on the JET program are assistant language teachers, ALTs. And we are assigned to public schools throughout Japan. Um, and um, there are roughly, as of last year, roughly 5,800 or so participants from 57 countries in total, which includes nearly 2,100 new participants. So the program's obviously very big. I remember back in 2016, whenever I was first starting, um, we heard from MEXT. MEXT is the Ministry of Education, Sports, and Technology. You all are probably familiar with that. Um, uh, but it kind of runs the JET program. Well, sorry, it runs the Council of Local and International Relations, which runs the JET program. There's all these different agencies, organizations, that kind of stuff. But MEXT is kind of the overarching, you know, organization that runs the Japanese education system. And they, as you all probably know, they instituted some reforms recently in preparation for the Tokyo Olympics. The reforms they focused on the speaking and listening abilities of students, and for example, they implemented them in school examinations and testing and that kind of stuff. Um, so it kind of overhauled it, and they really tried to have the JET program, um, you know, be help implement that. So we learned a lot about that back in 2016 when I started, and definitely the Tokyo Olympics as well. They really hyped that up from the moment we got there. Tokyo 2020. We've all been waiting for it. We've all been anticipating for it. It's supposed to be the big event that was gonna, help Japan globalize, and everyone's gonna come to Japan and visit, and tourist money is gonna boom, and then people are gonna come to Japan to study, study Japanese language and study, all sorts of subjects, while the Japanese go out across the world and study on their own. And it was supposed to be this great thing that was going to propel Japan forward. However, COVID-19 hit, pandemic happened, and it just kind of threw a wrench in the cogs, so to speak. So That brings me to my next slide here, which is the jet program in Disarray. Now, when I say in disarray, I just want to put a little disclaimer here. I don't mean to, um, speak ill of the Ministry of Education, Sports and Technology, or the JET program in general. Um, no one really could have saw this coming, and even if you could have seen it coming, there's not much we could have done to prepare. A lot of it, it just there was nothing that could be done. As the saying goes, shoganai, shikatakanai. That can't be helped. Um, so uh, yeah, the JET program is in disarray, and I'll give you an example of something that just couldn't be helped, and that was Tokyo orientation in the new JET intake. So the JET intake, the hiring process for JET usually starts around October, and it's a very long process. You apply in October, you interview in March, and then you get your placements in May, and then you finally leave for Japan around late July, early August. And when you come to Japan, you go to Tokyo orientation. Now, I want you to think about this in the context of a global pandemic. All right. So Tokyo orientation is this big lavish, uh, orientation where they fly thousands of new jet participants in from all around the world, from 57 different countries, right in the middle of Shinjuku, put them in a really fancy, lavish hotel. You know, everyone's sharing rooms, everyone's all crowded together. We're all wearing suits. We listen to speeches by big government officials and also from jet participants. I was actually supposed to give a presentation at the Tokyo orientation this year as a fifth-year participant. Um, and then after that, we all scatter out into every public school in Japan, pretty much. And if you think about it contextually with the global pandemic, that is just the worst thing that could possibly happen. Taking in thousands of people from all around the world and just scattering them about in the public education systems. Um, and it's such a massive event too that we couldn't really do Zoom. We can't do anything like that. So it was delayed until September, and eventually it was just pretty sure just got canceled this year. The Japanese government is not issuing any new visas for jets, so there's no new intake of jets. And not only is there no new intake, but there also many ALTs have gone home, um, and they've broken contract and headed home because um, I'm pretty sure if you're a foreign teacher listening to this, I'm pretty sure no matter what country you come from, I'm sure your embassy possibly alerted you to the situation. I'm from the United States, and the U.S. embassy told us to either leave now or be prepared to stay in Japan for an extended period, or sorry, for an indefinite period of time. That was probably back in like April or May or so, March. I can't remember, but it was back then, back when the pandemic was really spreading and hitting, and and yeah, that many ALTs they just decided to go home, which is completely understandable because many jets and ALTs they use this as kind of a gap year. For jet you can stay up a total of 5 years, but most stay for 2 or 3. Some of them just do it one. They just want to have a little adventure. Take a gap year. So for those that weren't prepared to stay in Japan for a long period of time, they went home. And also it's totally understandable as well because they want to be with their families, check on their families, that kind of stuff. Um, so yeah, so that happened, and then there's a big ALT shortage in the schools. Um, and schools can do one of two things. Um, you know, Depending on where they're at. If you look at the bottom there, some jets are expected to fill the role of ALTs that left. Maybe spread them out more thin because jets we teach ALTs we teach at many different schools usually. I teach at 2 different schools. Some people teach up to like 4 or 5. Um, and for schools that don't have an ALT, they might assign, for example, me who teaches 2 schools to go teach at another high school, and now I'm teaching at 3. I'm kind of spread out and kind of spread thin. Um, and other schools, they're just not having an ALT this year, because of the situation. But it all boils down to ESID. Every situation is different, on JET. Um, every situation is different. ESID. Now, this is probably one of the most important acronyms on JET. I don't know JET is an acronym itself, but it's one of the most important acronyms to know when you're talking about JET. Because the JET program, it ranges from the northernmost point of Hokkaido to the most remote island off of the coast of Okinawa to the middle of Shinjuku. You never know where you're going to be in the JET program. Also, the JET program, it assigns teachers to elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, and even private schools. You could work for your local board of education. You could work for your prefectural board of education, or you could even work for a private school. There's a vast array of different possibilities on the JET program. And if someone asks a general question when they're applying for the job, such as, I don't know, what are the apartments like? We can't really tell. Some ALTs literally live in houses, others live in like little monk cells. It's every situation is different. And that goes into the pandemic as well, because if you look on the map there's many different prefectures that declared a state of emergency, while others were less impacted by the COVID pandemic. Um, and some ALTs, like for example, I heard in Tokyo, they were literally just at home for several months, just kind of sitting there. They didn't have anything to do. They didn't have any classes to teach. There's a pandemic going on in one of the largest cities in the world, and there's not much they could do. Other places, like I believe Hokkaido and maybe Kobe, if I recall, there's a pandemic going on, and they had an emergency, but they still had to go to school anyway, even though they had no classes. There's no students there. They still had to go to school and desk warm, and a lot of them were very uncomfortable doing that because they're just like, why am I at school? Like, why am I out and about? I'm supposed to be staying home during a pandemic. So that actually caused a lot of people to go home as well because of concerns regarding that. So every situation is different. Every teacher is impacted in different ways. But now I'll get into my personal uh, experience during the pandemic on JET. I live in a more central part of Japan, relatively rural, and my area was like less impacted by the pandemic, but it still was. So I personally, well, it all started whenever spring vacation was extended while the summer vacation was shortened. And I pretty much worked from home for nearly the entire month of May, and I didn't really have anything to do during that month. I think the other teachers at school did do ERT, the emergency remote teaching, um, but I personally didn't. The only thing I did was I made some pre-recorded videos with some of their teachers, and I also made some like recordings with my microphone of passages from the textbooks and all that kind of stuff. But other ALTs I know, even in my city, other ALTs were doing the ERT every single day. They were doing one-on-one interviews with students, with their webcam from home. They were super busy. Other ALTs, such as myself, we didn't really have much to do. So, fortunately, I'm in grad school right now, doing online grad school. So it gave me a chance to kind of, get my studies in order and write a good essay. Um, but yeah, I was mostly home, only just doing some recording and pre-recorded videos. Also, my English club was canceled for, I want to say, 4 or 5 months, and that hit me hard because English club is one of my favorite parts about my job. That's probably my favorite part about being a jet. So that's pretty sad about that. And teachers' meetings were done remotely. Even though I was at home, I had to like get on Zoom or Google Hangouts or Meet or whatever, and I had to like just participate in a meeting. Um, Even though there's really nothing to do. But then I got back eventually. I got back in around mid-June, probably like mid or early June, and I taught a public health lesson upon returning. With the students in the classroom and everything. Of course, I wore a mask, and the students wore masks and that kind of stuff. But it was in classroom, so I didn't really do ERT, but I did do a pretty fun public health lesson that went quite well. So I'll share how that went and what that was. It was relatively simple, actually. And another way that the COVID has impacted ALTs and teachers is that I believe mixed they encouraged us, if I remember correctly, they encouraged the students not to like get into groups, not to speak and that kind of stuff. They got to keep the masks on. So it's quite difficult, when you're trying to teach a language. If you can't have the students speak to one another and speaking is actually, like I mentioned before, one of the things they really wanted to focus and improve on as far as the reforms. So for a while there, my lessons were mostly, written and mostly like writing lessons. Now things have mostly gone back to normal. We do speaking again and all that kind of stuff. But my public health lesson. So first, I showed them a list of basic medical vocabulary, a lot of like kind of general symptoms. I showed them the symptoms of COVID-19. And from an epidemiological standpoint, the symptoms are very terrifying because they're so general. Like you could, like it's difficult to discern whether it's just uh, based on the symptoms. Like they're so general that it's difficult to tell whether you have COVID or not. It manifests itself in many different ways, if it even shows any symptoms at all. However, from a pedagogical standpoint, the general symptoms are good for teaching, and it's good for public health to tell the students, what to look out for. So I taught them all the general symptoms of coronavirus, fatigue, malaise, fever, um, you know, coughing, that kind of stuff. And then I had them describe them. They had to choose a few and then describe them without using the name of the symptom itself. So, for example, with fever, they describe a fever without using the word fever itself. They can't just say I'm hot. I feel hot because we feel hot in summertime. What makes a fever a fever? Well, I feel hot. It's difficult for me to sleep at night. My elbows hurt. My knees hurt. I have joint pain, that kind of stuff. My head hurts. Um, Things like that. And the students gave some very interesting responses. And after that, I taught them an idiomatic expression, which is cabin fever. Now, I love teaching idioms. I know idioms aren't really the top priority as far as examinations go, but idioms are always fun, and they give us a chance to think differently. Think outside the box, because a lot of idiomatic expressions between languages that can't be directly translated. There's many Japanese idiomatic expressions that are difficult to translate in English, and vice versa. One of them is cabin fever, and I don't believe there's a Japanese equivalent for cabin fever. So I first I showed them the word cabin fever, and I had the students guess what it meant. Of course, I showed some pictures like the one on the top right there, kind of a cabin. Hello, what do you think cabin fever means? And the students kind of brainstormed. They wrote down. They kind of guessed what they thought it could possibly mean. And after that, I explained to them, of course, what it meant. Usually in the context where we use it, which is often wintertime. You feel cabin fever in the middle of January, whenever there's a foot of snow on your driveway, and you can't go out and you're stuck at home and it's cabin fever. But then I asked them, why do they think that cabin fever is so widely talked about right now? Why is it relevant to the situation right now? Because when I was staying home for the whole month of May, I had cabin fever. That's what I was thinking of. So um, yeah, we talked about staying home and the effects it could have on your mental health and that kind of stuff. I teach an academic high school. The students were a bit more advanced, so um, they could write and do activities like this more easily. But other teachers that I know, they taught at middle schools, elementary schools, lower level students, and they had their own public health lessons. So like I said, ESID, we all uh, we all did this differently. This is my personal experience, but I enjoyed it. Although I am glad now things have mostly gotten back to normal in my classrooms. We can get into groups, we can speak again. Of course with masks. But fortunately the cases have been dropping, and let's hope that continues into the autumn. Um, but I guess now I'd like to talk about the JET program moving forward. Um, how are we going to move forward with the JET program in particular and English teaching in Japan in general? So the first question is Tokyo 2021. The Olympics. Will it happen? Um, and I hope it'll happen. I hope that the Olympics happen and um, it can be as glorious as they planned for 2020. I hope that the Olympics can really kind of spark off. Like hopefully, we find a vaccine. Everyone gets better. Everyone gets immunity. We can get into groups again, watch sporting events again. You know, we can all travel around, and Japanese students can study abroad. People can study in Japan. English education rises. Here's hoping. But in the case it doesn't, then what'll happen? And that being said, it also we got to think about globalization in general. Will the world in general, and Japan in particular, will continue to globalize as it has been kind of moving in recent years? That's difficult to tell right now. Um, People have been eager to get back to normal, but how soon will that happen? Um, and we always got to be worried if there's another pandemic or something like that. So that's good to keep in mind, particularly because the JET program, its main focus is internationalization, English education, getting native speakers in the classroom, not only teaching language but also culture. So that's important to keep in mind. And next, another thing that I kind of neglected to mention earlier is the school year start time controversy. So public schools, I mean, universities as well, they all start in spring. while the vast majority of the world starts, September and August. So about that, that's caused some problems with Japanese students, particularly ones that want to study abroad. Maybe they finish high school and want to attend a foreign university. They have a big gap there, a big 4 month gap, um, you know, before they go. Also, if you're studying abroad in university from Japan or studying abroad in Japan from another university outside of Japan, the semesters are different, so that really kind of messes up with people's graduation times and classes, and it's kind of a big headache, and it really hinders study abroad in many ways. So in earlier this year, we delayed the start of the school year. So some people are saying, hey, let's just delay it till the start of September and just be like the rest of the world. Now eventually they didn't do that, but it is kind of on the table. So should Japan continue with this globalization, continue with their dreams of 2020, will they change the school year start time? That's something very important to think about as well. And if they do that, then the JET program probably have to adapt to that too, because the JET program usually starts in August. That might actually work out well, or they might have to change it. We'll have to see. And last, is JET worth it? And if you recall, I mentioned before that many jets have gone home, um, and there's a shortage of ALTs in public schools here. Um, and the schools that decided just not to have an ALT this year, they should ask themselves, is JET worth it? And I really hope and I think that many of them will say, yes, it is worth it. We need an ALT in the classroom. We need a native speaker there uh, in the classroom. However, some may possibly say, actually, no, we're doing fine with that one. Every school utilizes their ALTs differently, so it's difficult to say. But I think and I hope that that this will make people realize that JET truly is worth it, and that they should not only expand the program to have ALTs in more schools, instead of spreading that more, have more kind of a dedicated ALTs in a school, but also possibly um, just expanded the program into more rural areas that possibly don't have an ALT. Um, so that'll be interesting to think about going forward. And I hope, like I said, I hope that happens. But there's a lot of unknowns, a lot of ifs. So we will see what happens. But thank you very much for listening to my presentation. That's all. Thank you very much for to the Teachers Development Special Interest Group for giving me this opportunity. I hope you found this informative. And I hope everyone stays safe, stays healthy. Uh, good luck on your teacher journeys. Take care, and until next time. Thank you very much.